On the day after Christmas, the world outside was a picture-perfect wonderland of white. Inside, the only thing that felt real was the bitter taste of my brother's words and the cold reality that my life, a tidy world of blueprints and deadlines, had suddenly become a story with no home. I thought it was the end of my story, but sometimes, when you've lost everything, the universe is just clearing the way for a brand new beginning. How did my life go from a cardboard box on a cold street to a 7-figure inheritance in less than 24 hours? The sweet, familiar scent of Christmas dinner still clung to the kitchen, but a single sentence from my brother was all it took to turn that world upside down, leaving my pride to crumble in the sudden cold silence. "Nobody helps a penniless woman," Daniel said, tossing his napkin onto the half-empty table. "You made your bed, Emma. Now sleep in it." It was the day after Christmas. Snow fell in lazy spirals outside the window, the kind that made the world look peaceful if you didn't know how cold it really was. The mug in my hands felt like a hollow comfort, a cold, chipped reminder that even the smallest things could break. My hands, still numb from the freezing air outside, trembled as I tried to absorb a warmth that wasn't there. I sat there pretending the coffee was still warm, pretending I still had something to hold on to. I could hear the faint echo of a Christmas carol from a neighbor's house, a sharp, cruel contrast to the silent cold in my heart. I'd lost my job the week before, fired from the engineering firm after another round of seasonal cuts. My rent was 3 months overdue, my savings gone, and Daniel's living room had been my last refuge. His wife Claire didn't even try to hide her disgust as she cleared the plates. "You've been here 3 weeks, Emma," she said sharply. "It's time to move on." Move on? As if I had somewhere to go. I looked down at my phone at the rejection emails from every company I'd applied to. I had a degree in mechanical design, 10 years of experience, and not a single interview. My father used to say, "The world was fair if you worked hard." I wished he could see how wrong he was. By noon, Daniel's tone had turned final. "Look, you can crash at the shelter downtown. They take women on weekends." That was it. My Christmas gift from family eviction and advice to start over. I packed my duffel bag with the few things I owned: 2 sets of clothes, a notebook filled with half-finished turbine sketches, and my father's old wristwatch, the only piece of him I had left. I stepped into the freezing air, the wind cutting through my coat like a knife. It had been waiting for me, a final physical blow to match the emotional one. The bus stop was empty except for a half-crushed beer can and a flyer advertising a career restart program. I almost laughed. Restart. Like there was a reset button for failure. By the time I reached the city, the snow had turned into slush gray and heavy under my boots. I walked for hours trying to find the shelter Daniel had mentioned. It was full. Of course it was. So I found an alley behind a closed diner, wrapped my coat tighter, and curled up beside the dumpster. My phone battery blinked red, 1% left. I opened the photo gallery, pictures of the last Christmas before everything fell apart. My mom laughing, Daniel pretending to carve the turkey, me smiling, because I didn't know how temporary that smile was. Then the screen went black. The silence hit harder than the cold. I thought about how quickly life can turn: one layoff, one bad month, and you go from holding blueprints to holding your breath under a streetlight. Somewhere nearby, a car door slammed. A man's voice said something I couldn't make out. I didn't care. I pulled my bag closer and tried to sleep, but the pavement was too hard, and the memories were louder than the wind. The next morning, I woke to sunlight stabbing my eyes. The diner owner was standing over me, arms crossed. "You can't sleep here," he said, tossing a few bills at me. "Go get breakfast." It wasn't kindness, it was pity. But I took it. I went to the nearest cafe, ordered black coffee, and sat in the corner, invisible among people who still had somewhere to be. I opened my notebook, sketching lines of a new turbine model I'd been dreaming about for months, a compact, low-cost energy generator. If I could just build it, maybe someone would take me seriously again. "That's interesting," a voice said. I looked up. A man in a tailored coat stood there, mid-40s, polished, with a calm but curious expression. "Is that your design?" I hesitated. "It was just an idea." He smiled. "You're Emma Wells, right?" The sound of my name startled me. How do you know that he pulled a folded letter from his coat pocket, the kind printed on thick official stationery? I've been looking for you for weeks. My name's Victor Hale. I represent the estate of Harold Lane. The name made my chest tighten. Harold Lane had been the founder of Lane Mechanical, the same firm that fired me. I don't understand, I said. Victor slid the envelope toward me. Mr. Lane passed away earlier this month. Before he died, he made specific arrangements concerning you. I stared at the letter, my fingers trembling. Why me? Victor's smile deepened almost kindly. Because, Miss Wells, you just inherited $77 million. The world fell silent. The sound of coffee machines, laughter traffic outside, all of it blurred into nothing. 77 million. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. I laughed a raw, broken sound. This has to be a mistake. But Victor only shook his head. No mistake. Mr. Lane left everything to you, his shares, patents, and controlling interest in the company. He said you'd know what to do with it when the time came. My heartbeat pounded so loudly I could barely breathe. Yesterday I was homeless. Today, I was an heiress to the empire that had thrown me away. I stared out the cafe window at the gray streets of Chicago, at people hurrying past like nothing extraordinary had just happened. Miss Wells, Victor said softly, "Are you all right?" I looked at him and whispered the only words I could manage. "What happens now?" He smiled faintly. "Now, Emma. Everything changes." The car waiting outside the cafe was too sleek for this part of town, a black Mercedes that looked out of place beside cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. Victor held the door open like he'd done this 100 times before, like it was natural for him to escort a homeless woman who'd just been told she inherited $77 million. I hesitated. "Is this some kind of joke?" Victor smiled politely. "Miss Wells, I assure you this is very real. Mr. Lane's will was filed in Cook County 2 weeks ago. You are the sole beneficiary." I stared at the car. My reflection in the tinted window looked nothing like a millionaire's chapped lips, tired eyes, a coat with frayed seams. Still, something in Victor's voice, calm, practiced, sincere, made me take a step forward. Inside the car smelled like leather and confidence. Victor handed me a tablet. On the screen, a digital copy of the will scrolled past rows of legal text until my name appeared printed clean and final. Emma Wells, sole heir and executor. I blinked hard. Why would Harold Lane leave anything to me? I was just an engineer. I got laid off last year. Victor adjusted his cufflinks before answering. "Mr. Lane admired you. He mentioned your work several times in his notes. You designed the prototype for the W12 turbine, correct?" I nodded slowly. "But they shelved it. Said it was too expensive." "He disagreed," Victor said. "He called it visionary." Visionary. The word hit harder than it should have. The last time anyone called me that, my father was still alive. The car pulled up to a glass tower downtown Lane Mechanical's headquarters. I hadn't seen the building in months. The steel monolith still stood like a monument to power with Mr. Lane's name etched in silver. A shiver ran down my spine, a mix of old hurt and new disbelief. Just a week ago, this building was the symbol of my failure. Now I was being driven to its doors in a car that cost more than my entire life savings. "Why are we here?" I asked. Victor's tone softened. "There's a condition attached to your inheritance. Mr. Lane wanted you to hear it in the boardroom where it was signed." My stomach twisted. "Condition," he nodded. "Every great fortune has one." Inside the lobby gleamed with marble floors and the faint smell of disinfectant. The receptionist looked at me like I didn't belong, which, to be fair, I didn't. Victor guided me to the elevator and we rode in silence to the 34th floor. When the doors opened, I froze. The boardroom looked exactly as I remembered, long table glass walls, skyline view. Except now, Mr. Lane's chair at the head was empty. Victor gestured for me to sit. "Before he passed, Mr. Lane recorded a message for you." He pressed a button on a small device and the speakers crackled to life. "Emma, Mr. Lane's voice began gravelly but steady. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. You always reminded me of myself, stubborn, curious, impossible to manage. The company forgot what it means to innovate. I believe you can remind them. He paused, the sound of a weak breath filling the silence. I've left you my controlling shares in Lane Mechanical. But there's one requirement: you must serve as CEO for 1 full year. If you refuse or fail, the entire estate goes to the Industrial Education Trust. I sat there staring at the polished table, the words echoing in my head. CEO. Me. The woman who'd been sleeping behind a diner last night. Victor shut off the recording. He believed you were the only person who could restore his vision. I laughed, but it came out hollow. I'm not a leader. I can barely pay for coffee. Maybe that's exactly why he chose you, Victor said. People who've lost everything tend to know what really matters. He slid a folder across the table. This is your official appointment letter. The board meets tomorrow morning to confirm it. The paper felt heavy in my hands. They're going to hate me, I said quietly. Victor smiled faintly. They already do. That's why you'll surprise them. I looked out the window. From up here, the city looked calm, like chaos couldn't touch it. But I knew better. I'd seen what it looked like from the ground. What if I fail? I asked. Then the company dies, Victor said simply. But Mr. Lane didn't believe you would. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of signatures and legal explanations. By the time I stepped outside, the sky was dark and the streets glowed with the reflections of traffic lights on wet pavement. Victor handed me a keycard and an address. We've arranged accommodation for you at the Edgewater Hotel. You'll find clothes, meals, and an assistant waiting in the morning. Don't be late for the meeting. Why are you helping me? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Because Harold Lane was more than my client. He was my friend. And he said once, if Emma Wells ever walks through fire, she'll come out forged. I'd like to see if he was right. Then he stepped into the car and disappeared into the city lights. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the folder like it might vanish. The irony was almost cruel. I'd been designing turbines to generate power while losing all of my own. Now, suddenly, I held the keys to an empire. The Edgewater Hotel was quiet when I arrived. The suite waiting for me was larger than my entire old apartment, white linens, marble bathroom, a view of Lake Michigan stretching to infinity. On the nightstand sat a note in a crisp envelope, Miss Wells. You will find Mr. Lane's personal files in the briefcase by the desk. Review them before tomorrow's meeting. He believed you'd understand what to do next. Victor, I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind spinning faster than any turbine I'd ever built. Somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, I started laughing again, softly at first, then harder, until it turned into something between relief and fear. I had $77 million, a company, a legacy. But the truth hit me harder than anything Victor had said. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of losing everything. I was afraid of what I might become if I didn't deserve it. Chapter 3. The Boardroom Test. The next morning I woke up to the sound of waves hitting the shore below the hotel. For a moment I forgot where I was. The sheets were too soft, the air too quiet. Then the events of the past 24 hours came rushing back, Victor's calm face, the recording, the word CEO. I didn't feel like a millionaire. I felt like a fraud wrapped in hotel linen. The closet was filled with clothes, tailored suits in my size, shoes that probably cost more than my old car, even a briefcase. Someone, probably Victor, had thought of everything. I chose a navy blue suit and white blouse, something sharp enough to hide the shaking in my hands. I looked in the mirror, and the woman staring back at me was a stranger but a determined one. Just before I left, I noticed my father's old wristwatch lying on the nightstand. I picked it up and fastened it around my wrist. The leather was worn, the face scratched, but it was a familiar weight, a piece of him I could carry with me. I remembered his words spoken years ago. The world is fair if you work hard, Emma. I needed to believe that now more than ever. When I reached Lane Mechanical's headquarters, the sky was heavy with snow. The security guard glanced at my new ID card, hesitated, then waved me through. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. My reflection in the mirrored walls stared back at me with an expression somewhere between fear and defiance. When the doors opened, Victor was waiting. "You're right on time," he said, smiling slightly. "The board is already gathered." "I don't even know what I'm supposed to say," I admitted. He handed me a folder. Inside were a few pages of financial summaries, a list of board members, and a handwritten note at the bottom. "Trust your instincts." H.L. Victor gestured toward the glass doors. "They're all yours." The room fell silent as I entered. 10 people sat around the massive table, all in suits darker than mine. They looked up like I'd interrupted a sermon. At the head of the table, an older man with silver hair spoke first. "You must be Miss Wells. I'm Alan Pierce, interim CEO." "Until this morning," Victor said smoothly, stepping beside me. "As of now, Miss Wells holds controlling shares and full authority per Mr. Lane's will." Alan's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, she's an engineer, not an executive. Lane Mechanical needs leadership, not charity." I took a breath, my fingers instinctively brushing against the face of my father's watch. "Mr. Pierce, you're right. I'm not an executive, but I am an innovator. This company was built on a simple idea that good design comes from hunger, not from profits. And as someone who has been hungry, I understand that better than anyone in this room." A woman down the table leaned forward. "You've been unemployed for nearly a year. How do you plan to lead?" "That year taught me what this company forgot," I replied, meeting her gaze. "That good design isn't about numbers, it's about vision. And the W12 turbine, the project you all shelved, was visionary. Harold Lane knew that, even if you didn't." Victor's gaze met mine, briefly approval, calm, silent encouragement. Alan leaned back. His eyes narrowed. "If you want to run this company, prove you can. What's your first move, Miss Wells?" I looked around the room, the skyline stretching behind them. "We start with what we lost. We restart the research division and make the W12 our flagship project. We will create a compact, low-cost energy generator that will change the market. We'll be leaders again, not just survivors." One of the women snorted softly. "You really think an old prototype can save us?" I met her eyes. "No, but believing that nothing can is what killed this company in the first place." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Alan sighed, weary and condescending. "Very well. The vote will determine if we recognize your authority." Victor cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Lane's will doesn't require a vote. She is the CEO, effective immediately." The look on Alan's face was priceless, part fury, part disbelief. He stood abruptly. "This is insanity. We're letting a sentimental choice ruin what's left of Lane Mechanical." I rose too, my pulse steady now. "Maybe. But Harold Lane didn't build this empire by playing it safe. Neither will I." Victor handed me a pen. I signed the document that made it official: Emma Wells, Chief Executive Officer. The title felt unreal, but also like something I'd been running toward my entire life without realizing it. After the meeting, Victor walked me to the elevator. "You handled that well," he said. "I handled it," I murmured. "Well, it is debatable." He smiled. "They'll test you again. Be ready." But for what it's worth, Harold would have been proud. "Did he ever say why he trusted me?" I asked quietly. Victor thought for a moment. "He said you had one thing none of them did, a reason." When the elevator doors closed, I finally exhaled. My reflection looked steadier than it had that morning. I wasn't sure if I'd earned this power, but I knew I wouldn't waste it. Outside, snow fell harder, coating the streets in white. I walked toward the waiting car, every step echoing with the weight of what had just happened. Homeless yesterday, CEO today. And somewhere between those two worlds, I realized I wasn't the same person anymore. Because once you've lived through rock bottom, walking into a room full of men who doubt you doesn't feel scary. It feels like home. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Company. The applause in the boardroom had barely faded when I realized it wasn't for me, it was for themselves, for surviving another meeting under a new name that meant nothing to them. The moment the doors closed, the smiles did too. I could feel the air shift as I walked down the hallway. People whispered. Some nodded politely. Others looked away. News traveled fast. Harold Lane's hand-picked successor was a broke former engineer who just walked in from the street. Victor had warned me they would test me. He hadn't said they'd start immediately. The elevator opened to the executive floor. My new office was vast, sterile, too, polished to feel real. A wall of glass looked over the city. The desk was empty except for a sleek computer and a small plaque that read CEO, Emma Wells. I stared at it, wondering how long it would take before someone scraped my name off. A knock came at the door. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped in, early 40s, sharp eyes, sharper smile. Mason Trent, he said, offering his hand. Chief Operating Officer. Welcome aboard, Ms. Wells. Or should I say, welcome back. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, confident, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing everyone answers to you whether they admit it or not. Thank you, I said evenly. I'm still catching up. He smiled thinly. I heard you've had quite a journey since your last day here. There it was, the jab disguised as small talk. I have, I said. It teaches you who you can count on. Well, he said, leaning against the doorframe, you can always count on me for now. For now. The two words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. Or maybe exactly as he meant. After he left, I called Oliver, Harold Lane's former chief financial advisor. He'd been silent since the will was announced. When he picked up, his voice was cautious. I heard you're back in charge, he said. I am, I replied. But not for long if I don't fix this mess. I need someone I can trust, Oliver. Are you still in? He paused. You know what this means, right? Mason runs half the board. They'll try to push you out before quarter's end. I know, I said quietly. That's why I need you. By the end of the day, I had a small team, Oliver, Lydia from R&D, and a few engineers who still believed in Lane's original mission. Everyone else either avoided eye contact or watched from the shadows. That night I stayed late in the office, wading through stacks of old project files. The records were disorganized, scattered across various drives and folders, but as a former engineer, I saw the patterns. Buried in one folder labeled Confidential, I found something strange, a series of payments to offshore accounts under Mason's authorization. Millions moved out of the company just weeks before Harold Lane's death. I leaned back, the room spinning. If the numbers were real, Mason wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. Still here, Victor's voice startled me from the doorway. I found something, I said, handing him the documents. He scanned the pages, frowning. If this is true, it's fraud. But if you accuse him without proof, he'll bury you. Then I'll find proof, I said. Lane trusted me for a reason. Victor looked at me, half impressed, half worried. You sound like Harold. That's how he started too, thinking truth would be enough. Wasn't it? He didn't answer. By the time I left the office, it was nearly midnight. Snow fell in thick sheets over the city. My heels clicked against the marble lobby, echoing in the emptiness. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass, tired alone but not broken. The security guard nodded as I passed. Long day, ma'am. Long life, I said with a faint smile. When I stepped outside, a black SUV idled by the curb. The window rolled down. Mason. Working late already, he said. Impressive. Just getting started. He smirked. Careful, Emma. Around here, the higher you climb, the thinner the ice. Before I could reply, he rolled up the window and disappeared into the snow. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city lights flickered across the hotel ceiling like ghosts of everything I'd lost and was now somehow responsible for. The next morning, I arrived early, determined to get ahead of Mason's games. Lydia met me at the elevator with coffee and news. Someone accessed the prototype files last night, she said. Your account, apparently. I froze. That's impossible. I wasn't even logged in. Then someone wants it to look like you were, she said. They copied the blueprints for the W-12. The theft hit harder than I expected. The W-12 wasn't just a design, it was my last real idea. The one thing that had survived everything. Oliver joined us an hour later, his face grim. He's moving fast, he said. Mason's called a meeting with the investors this afternoon. Probably to Evaluate leadership stability. In other words, me. I looked at the skyline through the office window. Snow clouds loomed again, thick and gray. Let him play, I said. If he wants a war, I'll give him one. Lydia frowned. What's the plan? I turned toward them, voice steady. We rebuilt the W-12. Quietly. The way it should have been built. When it works, we won't need to defend my position, the results will. Oliver nodded. You're gambling everything on that I've already lost everything once, I said. This time, I'm not afraid to bet on myself. The city outside shimmered beneath the snow, cold and merciless. Inside that glass tower, I could feel the walls closing in, but somewhere deep in the pressure, something fierce started to spark again. I wasn't just going to survive Lane Mechanical. I was going to own it completely. Chapter 5. The Fire in the Walls. By the time I reached the office the next morning, the entire building buzzed with whispers. Something was wrong. The lights in the hallway flickered, and the air smelled faintly of smoke. Lydia was already waiting by my door, eyes wide. There's been a fire, she said before I could even set my bag down. The East Wing. Research lab. I froze. Anyone hurt? No, thank God. But the data server's gone. Everything. The W-12 files, the financial archives, all of it. For a second, the words didn't register. I just stared at her, trying to understand. The backups offline. Someone disabled the redundancy system an hour before the fire started. Oliver stepped in behind her, his face pale. We both know who did it. Mason. He nodded grimly. He's covering his tracks. I turned toward the window. Smoke still rose faintly from the other side of the building, gray against the pale winter sky. My throat tightened, but not from the smell, it was rage. Cold, sharp rage. Within an hour, the floor filled with people from legal, HR, and the fire department. Mason appeared in the doorway, his suit untouched, his tie perfect. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a magazine, the scent of his cologne overwhelming the faint smell of ash. Tragic morning, he said softly. I just came from the site. Electrical fault, apparently. Terrible luck. I glared at him. You mean convenient? He raised an eyebrow. Careful, Ms. Wells. Accusations like that don't look good on a CEO. Neither does arson, I snapped. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that meant he'd already won something I didn't know I was losing. You're under a lot of stress. Maybe take the day off. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving the scent of cologne and the promise of smoke behind him. Oliver leaned closer. He's daring you to make a move. If you accuse him publicly without proof, the board will turn on you. I swallowed hard. Then we'll find proof. Lydia crossed her arms. The lab's gone. We can't rebuild from ashes. I looked at her. Then we start somewhere else. That night I stayed behind after everyone left. The office was silent except for the hum of the emergency generators. I walked through the charred remains of the lab hours later, escorted by a security guard who kept glancing nervously at the walls. The air reeked of burnt plastic and chemical smoke. My workstation, what was left of it, was a heap of black metal and melted wires. I crouched down, brushing aside debris. Underneath the metal casing of the prototype chamber was still intact. The flames hadn't touched it. When I opened it, I found the one thing I hadn't expected: my father's old notebook, the one I used for early sketches. The cover was scorched, but the pages inside were dry. On the first page, written in his handwriting, were words I hadn't seen in years. If they burn it down, rebuild better. The next day, Mason called an emergency board meeting. He stood at the front of the room looking somber. It's an unfortunate setback, he said, but it highlights a deeper issue: lack of oversight. I suggest appointing an operations committee to share responsibility. For the company's stability, of course. Alan Pierce nodded immediately. Others followed. It was obvious Mason had already gathered support. I waited until the murmurs died down before standing. A knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. He thinks he's won. He thinks I'm broken. But he doesn't know what I'm made of. An oversight committee, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Or a leash. Mason smiled thinly. You misunderstand, Emma. The company needs guidance. Experience. Experience like yours. I asked, my blood starting to boil. You mean the kind that deletes data hours before it burns? The room went still. Alan cleared his throat. Ms. Wells, if you're suggesting— I'm not suggesting— I interrupted, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. My mind raced the words of my father's note, a fierce fire in my veins. If they burn it down, rebuild better. This is my chance. I'm starting. That fire wasn't an accident, and the same man asking for control was the last to access the servers. Mason's voice stayed calm. Do you have evidence I didn't? Not yet. A wave of doubt threatened to drown me, but I pushed through it. Not yet, I admitted. Then this conversation is over, he said smoothly. The motion stands. Hands went up around the table, 9-2. Motion passed. Afterward, as everyone left, Mason lingered near the door. You're out of your depth, he said softly. You think fire destroys, sometimes it just cleans the slate. I met his gaze. A cold resolve settled over my heart, silencing the fear. Then you should be afraid of what grows back. That night I sat alone in my hotel room, the smell of smoke still in my hair. The company was slipping away, the files gone, the board against me. But in the middle of the chaos, something inside me hardened. I opened my father's notebook again, flipping to a blank page. I started sketching from memory the W12 redesigned. Smaller, smarter, fireproof. Hours passed. When I finally looked up, dawn had started to break over the lake streaks of gold, cutting through the gray sky. I whispered into the quiet, You burned the past, Mason, not the future. The next morning I walked into Lane Mechanical with the notebook in my hand and ash still on my coat. People stared, whispering, but I didn't care. Because now I had something stronger than proof. I had purpose. And I was done playing by Mason Trent's rules. Chapter 6. Rebuilding from Ashes. The smell of smoke never really left the building, even after they scrubbed the walls and replaced the tiles. It lingered, faint but constant, a reminder of how fragile everything was. I walked past the blackened corridor every morning, refusing to let anyone repair it. I wanted Mason to see it, to know I hadn't forgotten. Oliver met me in my office with a folder full of bad news. The insurance claims stalled, he said. They're calling it an unconfirmed cause, which means Mason got to them first. Of course he did, I said. He's turning the fire into his alibi. Oliver placed the folder on my desk. The board's starting to doubt you, Emma. They think you're obsessed with this conspiracy. Then I'll give them something else to believe in, I said. He frowned. You're talking about the prototype again. Yes, the W12. I opened my father's notebook and spread the sketches across the desk. This isn't about proving Mason wrong. This is about proving Harold Lane right. My father built this company on the belief that a good idea can change the world. He believed in this turbine. If we rebuild it, we don't just save Lane Mechanical, we save his legacy. Or it'll blow up in your face, literally or politically, he warned. I smiled faintly. I've faced worse explosions. That afternoon, I gathered what was left of the engineering team in the abandoned West warehouse. 12 people, most of them quiet. All of them loyal. Lydia stood beside me, sleeves rolled up, her hair pulled back in determination. Everyone else has given up on this company, I said. But if we can rebuild the W12, we don't just save Lane Mechanical, we save what it was supposed to be. They nodded, a silent army ready for a war no one else believed in. We worked in secret after hours. The warehouse was cold and dim, the floor scattered with old metal parts and dust. I drew new schematics while Lydia and the others scavenged components from storage. Oliver brought coffee and updates, mostly warnings. Mason was asking questions, the board was restless. The media was circling. Let them circle, I told him one night. They'll stop when they see the light. By the second week, we had the first turbine frame assembled. It was rough, uneven, but alive. The hum of drills and the clank of steel filled the silence that had haunted me since the fire. For the first time in months, The company felt like it was breathing again. Lydia looked up from her workbench. "You know he's going to find out." "I'm counting on it," I said. And he did. 3 nights later, I came back from a supply run to find Mason standing in the warehouse doorway, hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of fury. "What is this?" he hissed, his usual calm gone. "This is a direct violation of my authority. A private project unauthorized." I didn't flinch. "Company property. Company project. Care to join in?" He walked closer, his eyes scanning the turbine. "You're wasting time and money on a dead design." Funny I said that's what people told the Wright brothers. Mason's voice dropped to a low, dangerous tone. "I admire your spirit, Emma. But you can't win. The board's already preparing to replace you at the next quarter meeting." I stepped forward until we were inches apart. "You burned half the company to stop me. You'll have to do worse this time." He leaned in, his eyes burning with rage. "Careful what you wish for." After he left, Lydia let out a shaky breath. "He's not bluffing, is he?" "No," I said. "But neither am I." Days blurred together. Sleep was optional. Coffee was survival. Every screw tightened felt like defiance, every spark of welding light like a declaration that we weren't done yet. Then one night, as the wind howled outside, Lydia flipped the final switch. The machine roared to life. For a moment, no one breathed. The turbine spun steady strong, flawless. The lights in the warehouse brightened with the surge of clean energy it generated. Lydia laughed out loud, tears in her eyes. "It works. It actually works." I touched the edge of the frame, feeling the vibration through my fingertips. "No, Lydia," I said softly. "It lives." We celebrated with cheap pizza and warm soda, exhausted but ecstatic. Oliver showed up an hour later, smiling for the first time in weeks. "Congratulations," he said. "But we've got a problem." "Of course we did." He set a newspaper on the table. The headline read, "CEO under fire for mismanagement and secret projects." Mason's fingerprints were all over it. He'd leaked photos of our work, twisted the story into something sinister. "They're calling it the Rogue Engineer Scandal," Oliver said. "He wants to make you look unstable." I stared at the paper, then at the humming turbine beside me. "Then we go public our way." Lydia frowned. "What do you mean?" I turned to Oliver. "We'll host a demonstration. Invite the press, the investors, the board. Let them see the truth for themselves." He hesitated. "That's risky. If anything goes wrong, everything's already gone wrong," I said. "It's time something went right." The next morning, I sent the invitations. The event was set for Friday. I spent every night testing, recalibrating, praying to whatever was listening that the turbine wouldn't fail. On the day of the demonstration, I stood before the machine palms, sweating, cameras flashing. The board sat in the front row, Mason watching from the corner, arms crossed. I took a deep breath and hit the switch. The turbine hummed, then roared to life, flooding the room with light and sound. Reporters gasped. Engineers cheered. For one shining moment, Lane Mechanical felt alive again. Mason's smile faltered. He leaned toward Alan and whispered something, but I didn't care. Because at that moment, standing in the glow of the machine I'd rebuilt from ashes, I realized I wasn't fighting for the company anymore. I was fighting for myself, and I wasn't losing. Chapter 7. The Deal That Never Was. The applause still echoed when Mason stepped forward, clapping slower than everyone else. The cameras caught his smirk, the practiced charm of a man pretending not to be furious. The board members whispered among themselves, eyes darting between the glowing turbine and me. "Impressive," Mason said finally, his tone laced with something sharp. "Really, Emma, I didn't think you had it in you." "I'm full of surprises," I replied, smiling for the cameras. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Enjoy your victory lap. It's going to be your last." The press didn't notice the venom under his tone. They were too busy taking photos, asking questions about innovation, sustainability, and leadership vision. By the end of the day, Emma Wells Saves Lane Mechanical was trending across every business feed. Investors started calling again. Old clients who'd gone silent wanted meetings. For the first time since Christmas, I felt like I could breathe. Oliver poured champagne in my office that night. "You did it," he said, grinning. "You just saved this company." I raised my glass. "No, we saved it." But Lydia was quiet. She sat on the edge of the desk, scrolling through her phone. "You might want to see this," she said finally. She turned the screen toward me, a news article fresh from the finance section. Breaking Lane Mechanical receives $200 million buyout offer from Vantage Industries. Mason's photo sat right beside the headline. The champagne suddenly tasted like ash. "He's trying to sell the company," I said. Oliver nodded grimly. "Vantage is one of his shell partners. It's a hostile takeover disguised as an investment." The next morning, Mason called an emergency board meeting. He strode in like a man who owned the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "Vantage's proposal could secure our future. They're offering double market value plus immediate liquidation of all debts. This is an opportunity none of us can ignore." I stood. "You mean you can't ignore it? The rest of us still have principles." He smiled thinly. "Principles don't pay shareholders, Emma. Profits do." I slammed a folder onto the table. "Vantage isn't buying Lane Mechanical. They're buying silence." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." I opened the folder, revealing the financial trail I'd spent the last week uncovering offshore accounts identical to the ones tied to the fire investigation. My late nights in the office had paid off. I had meticulously cross-referenced old company ledgers with leaked transfer data from an anonymous tip tracing a web of transactions that led directly to a series of shell companies. The final piece of the puzzle was the founding capital of Vantage, which perfectly matched the unauthorized fund transfers from Mason's account just weeks before my father's death. Gasps filled the room. Alan leaned forward. "Are you saying Mason owns Vantage?" "Not directly," I said, "but through 3 subsidiaries in the Caymans. He planned this for months. The fire, the smear campaign, it was all to drive the company's value down before he cashed out." Mason's mask finally cracked. "You can't prove that." "I already did," I said. "The files are backed up on secure drives, and the authorities have copies. So Mason, unless you want to discuss it with them instead, I suggest you withdraw the proposal." Silence filled the boardroom. Mason's jaw clenched. Then he smiled a dangerous, empty smile. "You think this ends here?" he said softly. "You've just declared war." He walked out, slamming the door so hard the glass trembled. When the meeting adjourned, the board scattered, whispering nervously. Lydia followed me into the hallway. "He's not going to stop." "I know," I said. "That's why we don't either." That night I met Victor at a diner outside the city, the same man who'd first told me about the inheritance. He looked older, weary, but his eyes still carried that quiet sharpness. "I heard about the buyout attempt," he said, sliding a file across the table. "Mason's desperate. But this is bigger than him." Inside the file were documents bearing Harold Lane's signature, a sealed trust clause in the company's founding charter. I skimmed through quickly, my pulse rising. "What is this?" I asked. Victor smiled faintly. "Harold left you a condition. If any executive attempts to sell the company within its first 10 years under new leadership, the controlling shares revert to the named heir." "Me," I whispered. "You," he confirmed, "but only if you can prove intent before the board approves the sale." "Which means I already did," I said, realizing dawning. "Mason just gave me everything I needed." Victor nodded. "Then you'd better move fast. He won't wait for the paperwork to catch up." The next morning I walked into the office with the file clutched under my arm. Reporters swarmed the lobby, shouting questions about the buyout. Mason wasn't in his office. His assistant said he'd taken an early flight to New York Vantage headquarters. "Perfect," I said. "We'll meet him there." Oliver and Lydia followed me to the airport, half running through the terminal. As we boarded the last flight out, Lydia asked, "You really think this will work?" I looked out the window as the city lights faded beneath us. "It has to. He's not just selling the company, he's erasing Harold's legacy. And yours," Oliver added quietly. I met his eyes and nodded. "Not if I burn his deal to the ground first." The plane cut through the clouds. dawn creeping over the horizon. For the first time in months, I felt something strange hope laced with fury resolve sharpened by loss. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about taking back everything he stole and proving that I wasn't just Harold Lane's heir. I was his reckoning. Chapter 8. The Manhattan Standoff. By the time the plane landed at LaGuardia, I was running on caffeine and rage. Mason's name was already trending online rumors of a secret acquisition, leaked emails, whispers of corruption. He'd moved fast, but I was faster. Oliver rented a car while I called Victor. He's meeting Vantage's CEO at the Manhattan Grand, Victor said. Private suite. He's going to finalize the deal before you can contest it. Then I'll crash the meeting, I said. The drive into the city felt endless. Neon lights blurred past the windows, while my mind replayed every betrayal, every smirk, every threat Mason had made since the fire. This was it, the confrontation I'd been building toward for months. When we reached the Grand, I instructed Oliver to create a distraction at the main entrance while Lydia and I slipped in through a side door. The lobby was a symphony of luxury and noise, but we moved like ghosts through the crowd. I caught the eye of a bellhop, slid him a $100 bill, and asked for the quickest way to the penthouse suites. He pointed to a service elevator out of sight. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and adrenaline as we rode in silence to the 31st floor. From there, we had to take the stairs. Each step up felt like I was climbing out of the hole Mason had dug for me. The air grew thinner, the silence heavier. Finally, we reached the top floor. Mason's voice echoed from the hallway. I'm telling you, David, once this contract is signed, Lane Mechanical's technology becomes yours. We'll be the only player in renewable machinery this decade. I didn't knock. I shoved the door open. Mason froze mid-sentence, the color draining from his face. The man beside him, David Lang, CEO of Vantage Industries, straightened, startled. Well, I said, stepping inside, don't stop on my account. Emma Mason began forcing a smile. You're out of line. This is a private illegal, I cut in. You're negotiating a sale without full board approval in violation of company charter and corporate law. Lang frowned. Is this true? Mason shot him a look. Don't listen to her. She's bitter unstable. Lost control of the board months ago. I tossed the folder from Victor onto the table. Then you'll love this bedtime story. The original trust of Harold Lane, founder and owner, states that any executive caught attempting an unauthorized sale loses all company shares. Permanently. Lang picked up the document, flipping through the pages. Is this real? It's notarized, I said, and filed with the New York Corporate Registry this morning. Mason's composure cracked. You can't just... I can, I said, because I'm Harold Lane's legal heir. You burned down a lab, sabotaged company property, and forged a deal with yourself through Vantage's shell accounts. It's over. Lang pushed back his chair. Mr. Trent, I don't appreciate being dragged into criminal activity. Consider our talks terminated. He left the room without another word. The silence that followed was thick and electric. Mason turned on me, voice shaking with fury. You think this makes you the hero? You just killed the only deal that could have saved your company. Saved? I laughed. You were never saving it. You were gutting it and selling the pieces. He took a step closer, eyes dark. You don't know what it takes to run an empire. Your father handed you a fortune you didn't earn, and you're about to destroy it with your ego. I held his gaze. You're right. I didn't earn it. I rebuilt it. From ashes. From your lies. Mason lunged forward, suddenly grabbing my wrist. You're making a mistake, he hissed. Oliver, who had just entered the room, moved before I could respond, pulling him away. Touch her again, and you'll regret it. Security burst in seconds later. Hotel staff followed by 2 police officers. Victor must have called ahead of time. Mason froze as they read him his rights. This is ridiculous, he shouted. You can't arrest me for doing business, wire fraud, corporate espionage, and arson, one officer said. You'd be surprised what counts as business these days. They cuffed him, and as they led him out, he turned to me one last time. You'll regret this, Emma. You can't run that company without me. I watched him go. my pulse pounding, my hands trembling not from fear but from release. "Watch me," I whispered. When the door finally closed, the silence hit me like a wave. Lydia slumped into a chair, tears glimmering in her eyes. "It's over," she said softly. I nodded, sinking onto the couch. "It's over." Oliver handed me his phone. "Not quite. You might want to see this." The news was already spreading photos of Mason in handcuffs headlines, calling him the CEO who burned his own company. My face appeared in the corner of every article. Emma Wells exposes corporate scandal, becomes youngest female CEO to reclaim fortune. I stared at the screen, numb. Lydia grinned. "You just made history." "No," I said quietly. "I just made things right." Outside Manhattan glowed beneath the night sky. For the first time since the inheritance, the city didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. We left the hotel just as snow began to fall, soft and silent. Oliver hailed a cab, but I stood there for a moment, letting the cold air wash over me. Somewhere deep inside, I felt it, the weight lifting, the storm quieting. For months I'd been surviving. Now I am finally living. As we drove toward the airport, I looked back at the skyline, the reflection of lights shimmering on the glass. "Lane Mechanical isn't just a company anymore," I said softly. "It's proof that even after everything burns, you can still rebuild stronger." Lydia smiled. "What now?" I watched the snow swirl past the window. "Now," I said, "we go home. There's a future waiting to be designed." Chapter 9. The Weight of Legacy. The following morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. My name was everywhere: business networks, social media, even morning talk shows. The woman who saved her father's company. The CEO who exposed corruption. They made it sound glamorous, triumphant. But all I felt was exhaustion. I sat in Harold Lane's old office, sunlight streaming across the massive oak desk. His photo still hung above the fireplace, gray hair, steady eyes, the kind of presence that made people stand straighter just by entering the room. Lydia came in balancing 2 coffees and a stack of folders. "You've got interview requests from every network," she said. "And the press wants a statement about the buyout collapse." I rubbed my temples. "Tell them the truth. We're restructuring, not selling." She nodded but didn't leave. "You also got this." She handed me a small brown envelope. "No return address. My name is handwritten in ink." I tore it open. Inside was a letter and a silver key. The letter was short. "If you're reading this, you've finally chosen courage over comfort. The truth you've been seeking isn't in boardrooms or contracts, it's at the old Lane estate. The one I left behind." It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's. A cold shiver ran down my spine, not from fear, but from the sudden profound realization that his presence was still here, guiding me from beyond the grave. "He knew this would happen," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Oliver walked in just then. "What's that?" "My father left a key," I said. "To what, I don't know. But I'm going to find out." The drive out to the estate took 2 hours. Snow blanketed the countryside, turning the roads into ribbons of white. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and empty against the winter sky. I hadn't been back since the funeral. When I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Every corner was frozen in time: his books, his blueprints, the worn leather chair where he used to read. I followed the sound of my own footsteps to his study. The lock under the desk drawer fit the silver key perfectly. Inside was a small leather-bound journal and a flash drive taped to the cover. The first page was dated 2 months before he died. "Emma, if you're reading this, you've already faced what I couldn't protect you from. Betrayal. Loss. The fire was no accident, and neither was your inheritance. I knew Mason's ambitions would consume him one day. That's why I left you this. The company isn't just an empire, it's a responsibility. It's technology. Our research has the power to change everything if used right, or destroy lives if it isn't." I flipped the pages, each one a confession. My father had discovered that the company's renewable energy prototypes could be weaponized. Mason had found out too, and wanted to sell them to Vantage's defense division. The flash drive contained blueprints, data models, financial records, proof that my father had hidden the designs to keep them from being misused. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. I could almost hear his voice in my head, a mix of triumph and sadness. He had known, and he had acted. All this time, I thought I was fighting alone, but he had been fighting with me. The anger I felt toward Mason was now dwarfed by a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about saving a company. It was about honoring a promise my father had made to the world. Lydia sat across from me, eyes wide. So Mason wasn't just greedy, he was dangerous. I nodded. Dad knew. He built all of this to protect the technology, not to sell it. Oliver leaned against the doorway. If this gets out, the government will want it. So will competitors. What are you going to do? I looked around the room, the walls lined with his life's work, the blueprints that once inspired me to dream. What he'd want me to do, I said quietly. Use it for good. We drove back to the city that night. The roads were slick, but I couldn't stop thinking about the journal's last line. Your greatest test won't be rebuilding what's lost, Emma. It'll be choosing what's worth building next. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with the board. They expected a speech about recovery, but I had something different in mind. This company was built on innovation, I began. But we've spent years chasing profit instead of purpose. My father's final research wasn't meant to make us richer, it was meant to change how the world creates energy. I showed them the data from the flash drive. The W12 turbine wasn't just a machine, it was scalable, sustainable, and capable of powering entire cities cleanly. It could end fossil dependency forever. The room went silent. This isn't about selling patents, I said. It's about building something that honors his legacy and restores ours. Alan Pierce crossed his arms. That's noble, Emma, but unrealistic. Research like that takes billions. Investors want returns, not revolutions. I met his gaze. Then we'll find new investors. People who believe in more than numbers. Oliver added. We've already had calls from the Renewable Futures Foundation. They're willing to partner. Alan sighed. You're gambling the company on an ideal. No, I said. I'm betting on the same thing my father did on people. After the meeting, I stood alone in the hallway looking out at the snow-covered city. The turbines spun in the distance, quiet and steady like a heartbeat. Lydia joined me, tucking her hands into her coat pockets. You think he'd be proud? I smiled faintly. He'd probably say, I'm reckless. But yes, I think he would. She nodded. Then maybe it's time to stop surviving his legacy and start living it. I turned toward her. Exactly. For the first time, I wasn't chasing redemption anymore. I was shaping something entirely new. A company built on integrity, on the belief that progress meant nothing without purpose. Somewhere deep in my chest, I could almost hear my father's voice again. Not as an echo, but as something alive. And for the first time since his death, I didn't feel like the lost daughter of a great man. I felt like his equal. Chapter 10. When the past calls back. 3 days after the board meeting, I thought the storm had finally passed. The headlines were settling, the engineers were back to work, and the first phase of the renewal initiative was already trending in the energy sector. For once, I felt in control of the story. Then my phone rang, and the past clawed its way back. Emma, it's Detective Ruiz. The name hit like a fist. The same officer who'd handled the arson case months ago. We've recovered new evidence from the fire site. You might want to see this in person. My heart thudded. Is Mason involved? A pause. It's complicated. Can you come to the station today? When I arrived, the air smelled of coffee and metal. Ruiz led me down a hall lined with old case files until we reached a small room. On the table was a sealed evidence bag containing a scorched USB drive. It was buried under the lab floor, he said. Recovered during reconstruction. The tech team restored fragments. He plugged it into a laptop. The screen flickered, revealing video footage time-stamped the night before the fire. The image was shaky, shot from a security camera inside the R&D wing. Mason was there. But he wasn't alone. A second man entered the frame. My breath caught. "That's Alan Pierce." Ruiz nodded grimly. "Your CFO." On the video, Mason handed Alan an envelope. Alan counted stacks of cash before tucking it into his briefcase. Mason said something, but the audio was faint. Then Mason poured liquid from a canister onto the work table. Alan flinched. He'd known. He'd been there when the fire started. I gripped the table. He helped him. "Looks that way," Ruiz said. "We'll be issuing a warrant. I thought you deserved to see it first." When I left the station, the city felt colder. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, not because of Alan's greed, but because I'd believed he was one of the few who still cared about the company's mission. At the office, Lydia and Oliver were reviewing turbine schematics when I walked in. I dropped my bag on the desk. Alan was on the fire. Lydia froze. What I told them, everything, the footage, the payoff, the complicity, Oliver cursed under his breath. "He's been acting strange all week," he said. "I thought it was guilt over the buyout." "Guilt, yes," I said, "but not for the reasons we thought." Before I could finish, my phone buzzed with a text. "Meet me at the River Warehouse alone. We need to talk." "Alan," Lydia glanced at the screen. "You're not seriously going." "I have to," I said. "If he's desperate, he might say something the police can use." Oliver grabbed his coat. "Then you're not going alone." The River Warehouse was empty except for the echo of dripping water and the hum of passing traffic outside. Alan stood near the loading bay door, hands in his pockets, looking thinner, older. His tie was loosened, his face pale. "Emma," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." "You should be thanking Detective Ruiz," I said. "He's about 10 minutes behind me." He winced. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. Mason said it was just a scare tactic, just damage control. I didn't know he planned to burn everything. You took the money anyway." He looked away. "I had debts. Mason offered enough to fix everything. I thought I could protect the company from the inside once it blew over." "Protect it," I said sharply. "You almost destroyed it." Alan's voice cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry, but Mason's not the only danger you face. There's someone else." I frowned. "Who?" Before he could answer, headlights flashed through the broken window. A car screeched to a stop outside. Alan's eyes widened. He found me. Gunshots shattered the air. Oliver shoved me down behind a stack of crates as Alan collapsed, blood soaking his shirt. Outside, a door slammed. Footsteps receded into the night. "Call it in," Oliver shouted. By the time Ruiz arrived, Alan was gone. He'd died before the ambulance even got there. The detective crouched beside the body. 2 shots to the chest, close range. "Professional job." "Mason's in custody," I said, shaking. "It wasn't him." Ruiz straightened. "Then maybe he had help." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my office staring at the city lights until sunrise. Alan's last words haunted me. "There's someone else." Who? When the first light of dawn hit the windows, my computer pinged with an incoming email from an encrypted address. The subject line read, "You don't know what you've inherited." The message contained a single attachment, a scanned letter written in my father's handwriting, one I'd never seen before. "Emma," it began. "If this reaches you, it means my precautions failed. Lane Mechanical's energy design was not the only one. There's a second prototype one I buried for a reason. Not everyone wants progress for the world. Some want control. Trust no one outside your circle." At the bottom of the page was a location, a set of coordinates just outside Boston. I read it 3 times before closing my laptop. My hands were trembling not from cold, but from a mix of dread and a chilling sense of purpose. My father hadn't just left me an empire, he had left me a battlefield, and the war had just begun. Lydia found me an hour later. "You haven't slept," she said gently. There's something I need to find, I said. Emma Allen just died. You should let the police handle this. I can't, I said quietly. This is what my father warned me about. She hesitated, then nodded. Then we'll go with you. No, I said, not this time. If anything happens, you keep the company running, promise me. Lydia's eyes glistened. You sound like him, you know. Harold. I smiled faintly. Then maybe I'm finally doing something right. As I left the office, the first snow of the new year began to fall soft and silent against the city streets. Somewhere in that cold, white haze, I knew the truth waited buried deep, dangerous, and unfinished. And whatever my father had hidden, it was time to unearth it. Chapter 11. The second blueprint. The drive to Boston felt like driving straight into the unknown. Snow blanketed the interstate, the world outside, reduced to endless white lines and fleeting headlights. My father's coordinates led to the outskirts of an abandoned industrial park, one of the company's earliest test sites, long shut down after funding cuts. The gate was rusted, the sign half buried in Snow Lane Mechanical, Research Division. B. I parked the car and stepped into the cold. The air smelled faintly of metal and frost. My breath came out in visible clouds as I pushed open the heavy door to the main building. Inside, the walls were lined with cobwebs and old posters of turbine models from decades ago. Everything felt untouched, like time had frozen when my father left. The coordinates led me down a narrow staircase to a locked steel door. I pulled out the key from his letter. It fit perfectly. The room beyond was small, barely lit, filled with dust-covered machines and stacks of boxes. A tarp covered something large in the center. When I pulled it back, I gasped. It was another turbine, but unlike anything I'd seen before. Sleeker, compact, the design years ahead of its time. A faded label on the base read, Prototype Z1. Next to it, a metal cabinet held several sealed folders. Inside, I found my father's final notes. Z1 is not for production. Too powerful. Unstable. Requires quantum regulator core energy amplification beyond safe thresholds. Destroy if compromised. I sat down on a crate, the paper trembling in my hands. The Z1 wasn't a project meant to save the world. It was one that could destroy it. The door creaked suddenly behind me. I froze. Quite a legacy your father, Harold Lane, left you, a voice said. I turned. A man stepped out of the shadows, mid-50s, well-dressed, calm in the way dangerous people are. His presence filled the room like a shadow swallowing light. Who are you? I demanded, my hand instinctively reaching for the wrench lying on a workbench. He smiled faintly. Let's just say I used to work with Harold. My name's Richard Kavanaugh. I handled external contracts for Lane Mechanical, specifically the defense prototypes your father kept buried. Defense? I said, my voice tightening. You mean weaponization? He tilted his head. Perspective, Ms. Wells. Energy can build cities or power nations. Your father had vision, but he lacked conviction. You killed Allen, I said quietly. Richard didn't even flinch. Allen outlived his usefulness. Mason, too. Harold knew what he was protecting, and so do you now. The Z1 is the future if you have the courage to finish it. I took a step back toward the turbine. My heart hammered against my ribs. You won't get it, he sighed. You inherited your father's idealism, and like him, it will get you killed. Before I could react, 2 men stepped through the doorway behind him, armed and silent. My pulse pounded. I scanned the room, old tools wires, scattered debris, but no real weapon. Richard gestured toward the prototype. Give me the data drive, Ms. Wells. The Z1's blueprints. Do that and you walk away. I forced a laugh. You think I drove through a snowstorm just to hand you the key to the apocalypse? He smiled. Then I'll take it from your office after they find your car in the river. As one of the men lunged forward, I grabbed the wrench from the table and swung it. A harsh clang echoed through the lab as it hit his gun, sending the weapon spinning across the floor. I dove for it, my fingers wrapping around the cold steel. I didn't hesitate. A deafening bang ripped through the silence as I fired into the ceiling. Get back, I shouted. The men hesitated. Richard's calm cracked for the first time. You won't shoot. Try me. His eyes flicked toward the turbine. If you damage that machine, the world will remember you as the woman who destroyed humanity's greatest invention. I aimed higher. Then maybe they'll remember me for saving it. Before he could speak again, the siren of approaching vehicles pierced the silence. Flashing lights flickered through the dusty windows. Richard cursed under his breath. You called them. No, I said, breathing hard. But someone knew I'd come here. Victor stepped through the doorway, flanked by police officers. Step away from her, he ordered. Richard glared at him. You've always been predictable, Victor. Still playing the lawyer when the real power is sitting right in front of you. Not anymore, Victor said. This time you lose. The officers moved in. Richard's men dropped their weapons. Richard raised his hands slowly but smiled as they cuffed him. You can lock me up, he said to me, but you can't bury an idea. Someone else will build it. Then I'll make sure they don't, I said. When he was gone, I sank against the wall, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Victor crouched beside me. You okay? I nodded weakly. He wanted the Z1, said it could power or destroy nations. Victor looked at the turbine, then back at me. Your father wasn't exaggerating. I've seen enough to know what that thing could do. What are you going to do with it? I looked at the gleaming metal, its reflection catching the light like something alive. The same thing he would have done, I said quietly. Make sure it never falls into the wrong hands. We sealed the lab under police protection that night. I drove back to Chicago in silence, the key still in my pocket, my father's voice echoing in my mind. The greatest inventions are the ones you choose not to finish. By the time I reached the city, dawn had broken. Snow glistened on the rooftops, soft and peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. Something had ended in that lab, and something else had begun. When I stepped into my office, Lydia was waiting. She looked at my face and didn't ask a single question. She just handed me a cup of coffee and said softly, "Whatever you found, I hope it was worth it." I looked out the window at the skyline, the turbines spinning slowly in the wind. It was, I said, because now I finally understand what my father was fighting for, and what I'd have to protect no matter what came next. Chapter 12. Everything changed. Winter melted into spring before I realized how long it had been since the night in Boston. The days became a blur of rebuilding, negotiating, and facing cameras that wanted sound bites more than truth. Every headline had my name in it. Some called me a savior, others a thief who inherited power she didn't deserve. I stopped reading them. Lane Mechanical was finally alive again, but not the same. The company wasn't about profit or legacy anymore. It was about purpose. I made sure of that. We built research teams dedicated to clean energy open scholarships for young engineers and turned what was once a corporate fortress into something that actually served people. Still, I couldn't shake the shadows. The Z1 project was sealed away in a government vault, hidden under a Joint Protection Act Victor helped negotiate. No one would ever touch it again. But sometimes at night, when the city went quiet, I'd think about the hum of that turbine in the dark lab. The sound of limitless power and the edge of catastrophe. Victor stopped by my office one morning, briefcase in hand. His usual calm expression softened. "It's done," he said. "Richard Kavanaugh's network is officially dismantled. Every name he worked with is under investigation." I let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "So it's really over." He nodded. "For now. But you should know something, Emma. Power never stays buried forever. Someone will dig again someday." "I'll be ready," I said. He smiled faintly. "That's exactly what your father would have said." After he left, I walked through the office floor, dozens of engineers and designers hunched over their projects, laughter echoing between desks. Lydia caught my eye and waved me over. "We hit 90% efficiency on the new turbine," she said. "It's not as powerful as the W12 or the Z1, but it's safe, scalable, and ready for testing." "Perfect," I said. "Name it." She hesitated, smiling. "You should." I looked at the design projected on the screen. It was simple and elegant, exactly what innovation should be. "Call it the Phoenix." Lydia grinned. Rising from ashes, exactly. The launch day came 2 weeks later. Reporters crowded the plant cameras, flashing microphones thrust forward. I stood at the podium with the prototype humming quietly behind me. 2 years ago, I stood in this same company with nothing but a notebook and a handful of people who still believed in something bigger than themselves. We faced loss, betrayal, fire, and failure, but we also learned that rebuilding isn't about what you lost. It's about what you refuse to give up. I paused, scanning the crowd, spotting familiar faces: Lydia, Oliver, even Victor standing near the back. This turbine, I continued, isn't just a machine. It's proof that we can create without destroying. That progress doesn't have to come at the cost of conscience. Lane Mechanical isn't just back. It's reborn. The lights dimmed, and the Phoenix came to life. The hum filled the room, steady and clean. The monitors lit up: energy flow, perfect, emissions, 0. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then applause erupted, louder and warmer than any I'd ever heard. I stepped back, letting the team take the spotlight. This wasn't just my victory, it was ours. Later that evening, I stood alone on the balcony outside my office, the city lights shimmering below like a living circuit. Snowflakes drifted from the sky again, faint and slow. Lydia joined me with 2 cups of coffee. So she said, "What now?" I smiled. "Now we keep building. But smarter this time." She nodded, then looked out at the skyline. "Have you ever thought about what your father would say if he saw all this?" "All the time," I said. "But I think I already know." The wind picked up, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice, steady, proud, patient. "Keep going, Emma. The world needs people who build." As the last snowflake melted against the railing, I realized something: this story had never been about revenge or even redemption. It had been about transformation, about how loss can burn you down to the bone, and how, if you're lucky, that fire forges you into something stronger. I thought back to that first night after Christmas, the cold pavement, my brother's words, the feeling of being invisible. "Nobody helps a broke woman," he'd said. He was wrong. Nobody has to help you. You learn to help yourself. And when you do, when you rise, you become the proof that survival is its own kind of victory. As I turned back toward the office, the turbine's soft hum drifted through the glass. It was the sound of hope, of beginnings. Everything had changed. But maybe for the first time, it had changed the way it was always meant to. And as the city lights glowed like embers beneath the falling snow, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Because in the end, the empire my father built wasn't just a company. It was a heartbeat. And now it was mine.